Hey everyone, it's 7:12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, November 28, and they say it's 2022. So it's only been a couple of days since I made my last tOP briefs, but I've got some extra time, which is great, makes me very happy. I can make more videos. So a couple of things here. Yeah, this video is going to be, first off, mostly Bible-based, not preachy for anybody new. That's not what I do here. If you've listened to some of my old stuff, the stuff that I'm producing now and for quite some time is night and day difference, because I've actually learned and grown and discovered new things and been in and out and through so many different variables, and it's really what we should look for if we want to find somebody who's making social media and or academic literary content who is just an honest and sincere person. We should look for somebody who's growing, who, if they published anything a few years ago, might be saying something a bit different today, because in part they'd have to be. They'd absolutely have to be. You can't get somebody who started years ago and from the beginning they had their opinions all fully formed and they haven't really changed at all in years. That is not a genuine and sincere person, or if they're genuine and sincere, that is a person who isn't using their brain. The reason is because we are so saturated with lies in this world, in our lives. It's literally impossible. It's literally impossible for one to not change their opinions on many things as time progresses. Couple of things, real quick. One is I'm going to be looking into doing a sort of batch process for the t-shirts I'm going to be able to offer, so that people who want to support me, they can buy these t-shirts. I think they're cool. And they'll be kind of a decent statement you can wear around, which I do a lot. I buy t-shirts that actually say something that I want to say when I go out, or if I don't care whether people read it, look at it, notice it or not, because it looks good. And I think they're both. But the thing is, I don't want to have to charge what it would take for a lot of the services that offer on-demand. And the thing is, probably everyone that does offer on-demand, it's all like heat transfer, and it's not, the kind of inks that actually permeate the fabrics, not as high quality. However, I think if I did pre-orders in batches, I could actually get screen printed, so high quality shirts with the high quality screen printing in ink on the shirts, or even a high quality heat process that had permeable ink that would go into the fabric itself. So I'll be talking about that more as I go. The channel, so there's Aubrey Project 2, I also have on YouTube as a sort of a backup. That you can watch without any monetization on it, and soon you'll be able to watch this without any either, because it's gotten to be a complete headache for me to have the monetization on this channel. First off, I have to be concerned about what I can use and what I can't, which I don't want to concern myself with. Secondly, I don't even like being in business with Google whatsoever, and I feel like that's like me being in business with them, and I don't like it. The only reason I did that in the first place is basically to irritate the people who complain about monetization. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I pay for a YouTube Premium subscription, which in some ways it really does suck, because there's almost nothing. They have pushed out or blocked from my view most of the channels that still offer anything of substance. It's really, really lame, but I still do it because Well, why? Well, for one thing, I want to be able to sometimes listen to things without having to have the screen of my phone on. That's the biggest thing. Plus, the ads have gotten so obnoxious. All the ads they'll put on videos, if you're not buying a subscription to them, they've gotten more obnoxious than television. You might as well watch television. So I'm removing that. It'll be very soon, probably within a week. Gone. And so I will be, again, asking people to help support the work that I do in whatever way you can. And that's one of the reasons for the t-shirts, to give people the opportunity to do that, as well as not the live streams that I've tried with the Prism software, which is just kind of clunky, and then trying to get it to broadcast over these multiple platforms, clunky, and not something I want to put a ton of time into because I don't have it. It's the same thing with like organizing and archiving my videos and other material. The reason I don't have the time to make it look all slick and everything, because people have sent me emails or messages or whatever with criticisms about a lot of the way that things are presented. And I tell them, yeah, I understand. Thanks for your honesty, and that was helpful. But you have to understand, I don't have the time to do that because literally all of the free time I have, I'm literally working forward. And right now, for a while now, in addition to the other couple of things that I'm constantly working on, I am back to working on the geography book. Now, anybody who has wondered, why is it taking so long to produce this geography book? Well, because of, for one thing, just how messed up our understanding of quote-unquote Hebrew or Oberi, the source language of the Bible, is. Our understanding of it and the way it's been presented, not only in the English versions, and all of them follow suit with KJV for the most part. And that is all taken from what they call the Masoretic text, which is predominantly a text called Mikriot Gedolot, which has every sign of being altered in all kinds of very subtle ways. Not altered altogether as in taking out bunches of words, but altered. Most specifically by the Masorah, which dictates when a word is a noun or a verb or an adjective. It can dictate when a word means one thing and then when it means another thing. It can dictate when 20 different words all are translated as the same exact word in English whenever they decide. It dictates all manner of things. So the changes are very interesting. And I don't have answers as to why they made the changes in the way they did. This also carries over to the Septuagint and absolutely, of course, the Latin Vulgate. I illustrate in the first hour or so of bringing it all together, the last really major feature I did with video. It was an audio and video. The last audio feature I did was against Mason and Josephus. I recommend both of them. Bringing it all together, I don't still believe a number of the things that I presented in there. However, I still think all of the material is relevant and it can be used to at least get some people thinking. And one of the aspects to it is that first hour or so spent on proving that the Septuagint is actually a translation made not from pure Oberi, but from Masoretically changed or altered Hebrew. So there's a lot. There's so much that has been altered. But one thing that is really great for someone like me who spends a lot of time, most of my time, studying the Bible, whether it be for the sake of geography, whether it be for the sake of theology, in the sense of comparing New Testament ideas to Old Testament, or just linguistically in general. For someone like me, I really appreciate the fact that there still are certain Greek versions available. There is the general Greek Old Testament, which is it's basically compiled from like 3, which is a pretty typical 3 manuscripts. You also have like the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. I also have the original manuscripts, and I can search through them if I really wanted to. With the Septuagint, most of them, like the 3 manuscripts, they're very similar in a lot of ways. It's not like the New Testament Greek manuscripts, which there's so many of. And there's such a variation between those and the styles of Greek, but there's also so much variation between the Gospels, even within the same style of Greek manuscript. And there's so much variation between the ideas espoused by Jesus in, well, pick a gospel, because they're not the same. And Paul. That's a mess, and it's a separate thing. Greek, in the Septuagint, is very interesting, because not only did it tell me from just careful study that it was derived from Masoretic manuscripts, not pure Hebrew manuscripts. And how? Well, for one thing, by the way that the authors, the people that put together the Septuagints, followed Masoretic dictates in pronunciation. You see, it's so uncanny that, in my opinion, it's absolutely undeniable that the one followed the other, not the Septuagint made a couple thousand years ago, and then the Masoretic started slowly developing 1,000 years later. Not a chance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through Genesis 22, some bits. Now, I'm not heavily going to get into the linguistic aspects, though I may a bit. Some of this is going to be more bits and pieces of what I'm starting to see, because I've been working for some time now on the Exodus chapter, which seems to quickly be evolving into the Exodus book. You have to figure the Exodus itself really covers 4 books within the first 5 books, and actually the last part of Genesis, because the latter part of Genesis tells us how Israel ended up in Mitzrayim, not Egypt. And then, to be honest, the first book after the books that contain information on the Exodus, the time between Mitzrayim and Canaan, which is about 40 years. I mean, even starting in Joshua, there's a lot that you still have to pick up from Deuteronomy, Numbers, even Exodus, Judges as well. And there's a portion in Judges where Jephthah goes over what happened when Israel left Kadesh to Moab. The Psalms. There are various prophets that refer back to this time. It was one of the most important times in this foundation of a nation that happened, as is what we see in Genesis. A lot of Genesis, like starting at Genesis 12, and then even before, from, the time of Nick, not Noah, Nick, through to, his descendants in Genesis 10, the Tower of Babel. These are all leading up to YEUE founding and then building a nation out of this man, Abram, who came from the stock of Shem, one of Noah's 3 sons, who everything common sense and scientific should tell us 3 racially similar sons, not the thing they try to sell us where they try to say Ham was black because of a curse, by the way. So, you talk about making somebody feel less than because of their race. Yeah, they say he was black because he was cursed. Japheth, who knows how Japheth got Oriental? Right? And then Shem, which they say was Arabic. So I guess they have no idea where Whitey come from, right? From outer space, I guess. It's ridiculous. So I'm at Genesis 22, as I said. We have a situation beginning in Genesis 22. By this time, Abraham with his father, Terach, come out of it's actually just Ur of the Kasdim, which these translators turn into Ur of the Chaldees. I don't know how they get Chaldee out of Kashadim. They were Kashadim. But they do. The Ur part too. It was Ur, like the same word that's used for light in Genesis 1. And light, even the AR and AUR light is a little bit not subjective, but it gets around a lot. I don't know if it absolutely means only the shiny, intangible, light. I don't know how to describe light other than to say light. Anyways, no rabbit trails on light. They come out of this hour of the Kashadim. And Terach brings them to not Canaan, but it says Canone. So the area close to Canaan or Canaan. And in fact, where they're staying, the Bible tells us where they're staying. It's Haran. It's actually in the land of what would become known as Aram. Then, when they're there, staying there, Yahweh tells Abram from there to leave his father's house. He takes his wife Sarah, who is his half-sister. He takes his nephew Lot, who was the son of his brother who is dead. We don't get a lot of information. He died back in the land of the Kashadim, and maybe that's one of the reasons why Terach decided to go. And Yahweh says to go into Canaan. Now, when Abram gets into Canaan, Yahweh promises him that he's going to make him into a great nation. Abraham has no children at that point in time. He has no children. And he is, by the time that he tells him to go into Canaan, he is, got to wait 15 years, so 89, he would be 84. And I think Sarah about 70, pretty close. Because they have to wait 15 years. From the time he comes to Canaan till the time that Sarah actually bears Isaac, it's like 15 years. That's a long time. From the time Yahweh says that you're going to have a son through Sarah, not Agar, who is another issue, that she was a Mitzri that was given to Sarah. I'm telling all of this because to give us a little background on the fact that Yahweh's having Abraham do a lot of things. He's telling him where to go. He's telling him what he's going to do with him, what he's going to do with his descendants, that he's going to be a blessing, and so on and so forth. It's a lot to it. And then Abraham has to wait a long time, 15 years. Now, for any of you who are at least 20, because you don't really have your memories all that great until you're maybe 5. Some people a little bit earlier. You know how long 15 years is. It's a long time. And he waits it. And a lot of things happen in the meantime. He makes the mistake of accepting Sarah's bondmaid, and maybe part of the reason he did is because Sarah just does kind of strike me as a little bit of a bitch to live with. A little bit. So I don't know. But anyways, it was a bit of an error because that caused some problems. So he does do that in the meantime. And kind of fast, too. They were only in Canaan for a couple of years when that happens. But finally it happens. And in fact, YEUE comes and visits Abram before all of this, because this is right before he sends a couple of his malak, his messengers, his workers that people call angels, over to Siddim and Omre, not Sodom and Gomorrah. So he visits him and he reminds him that he's going to give him a son through Sarah. And this is who he's going to make this nation, through Isaac. So we've got all of that laid out. And it's been a long time. Abram has actually gone through a lot since YEUE brought him into Canaan. He's endured problems with what they say is famine. I don't know that that's the words used as famine. We know that he had to leave where he was staying in Canaan, which, if you want to believe this happened in Palestine, it would be a little bit more North Palestine where he was staying. He said he was staying between Bethel and Ai, as they transliterate them. But after he first has to leave and go to Mitzrayim, comes back, he starts staying in what they say is the south of Palestine. These areas, I've got it up on the map here. I'll zoom out a little bit, and you can just follow my cursor if you want. So I've got a thumbtack where Kadesh or Kadesh Barnea, or sometimes it's called En Mishpat. In Genesis 14, it's called En Mishpat. And actually, the Ein is Oin, fountain, and there ain't no fountains here, so that should be a red flag. He starts staying somewhat in Kadesh, but more frequently, I've got another thumbtack right here, in what they transliterate as Beersheba. It's Bar Shebo, which is supposed to be something like a well and a promise or pact, this Shebo thing. Though I would think that would be Berit. But that's neither here nor there. So both of them are supposed to be in essentially the south of the Palestine model, which is not good fertile land in any stretch of the imagination. It's probably not good fertile land if you were an earthworm. Okay? It sucks. And they've come up with a million reasons to try to explain why it sucks. People have tried to say, well, there used to be bunches of trees, but the Romans cut down all the trees, crucifying people. But the thing is, even in a land this size, oh boy, would it take a long time. Follow me. Would it take a long time to cut down enough trees to make that kind of difference? And the thing is, while you're going through and trying to cut down all these trees in this whole entire land, which you'd have to wonder how they had enough people there cutting down trees to make this difference, the ones back where you started, they're going to be growing back again. You know that, right? Because they drop seeds. When trees grow, they drop seeds all around them. They're called nuts. So that idea, I think, is nuts. There are people who talk about desertification, and they'll show you like areas maybe in America where deserts, they say, are encroaching on non-desert places. And they're literally talking about where there are dunes right next to places that are not sandy dunes. Dunes move and dunes shift. And everybody who lives near dunes knows that. There was a really popular dune. It was huge right near where I used to live. They all called Mount Baldy. And then they closed Mount Baldy. You know why? Because Mount Baldy shifted. A big side of Mount Baldy just fell and the whole thing shifted, and it covered all kinds of stuff that used to be in the parking lot and everything, because dunes shift. This isn't about shifting dunes and shifting sands. Most of this place is hard gravel. There's no sign that there ever was good soil here, so I call BS from the outset. So I'm doing this Exodus chapter, and I'm having to look into a lot of things, and I had to look in Genesis 22 as a reference to the Exodus chapter. Now, it was because, for those not familiar with Genesis 22, after all of these pretty tough times that Abraham and his family have all endured since they came to Canaan, a lot of traveling around to Mitzrayim, then back to other places, and they did move around quite a bit, because remember, they're cattle herders. They're cattle and sheep herders. They may have been flirters, which is a really smart way to actually herd cattle, sheep, and goats all together. But so they had to move around a lot anyways. They go to Mitzrayim, they come back up to Canaan, they have to go and stay in the land of the Philistines. Hey, everybody! Hey! Does anybody know about the Gaza Strip? Where they say the cities of the Philistines were? Does everybody know about the Gaza Strip? That's not where you go if you want good land to graze a flird. So he stays there for a really long time, because apparently Abraham's livestock subsisted off of sand and gravel. So then he heads back to Beersheba, and that's where we pick up Genesis 22. He stayed a long time in Canaan, 15 years. 15 years before YEUE promised him a son. Well, actually, that's more than 15 years, because Isaac's been born. Sorry. It's way more than 15 years. Isaac was born, and he's probably kind of a grown man by now. I apologize for that error. But see, a lot happens, because the last time they end up going to Gerar, which is the land of the Philistines, they stay there for a really long time. So from Genesis 19 forward to Genesis 22, a long time has passed. And this sort of thing happens a lot when you're reading the narrative of the Bible, and you have to pay attention to things like that. Why? Because sometimes something important won't happen for a long time. That's why at the end of Genesis we see Israel going into Mitzrayim. And when we start in Exodus, they've been in Mitzrayim for well over a century by then. And they were only there for 215 years, not 400 years. 215 years. Tops. That's how long they were there. But we don't really see anything that happened. We get little hints of it, like in Chronicles and maybe one other book. Little things that happened. Very, 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 very small bits of information, because a lot didn't happen. You know what was happening in that time? Same thing that was happening between Genesis 19 and Genesis 22. People were growing up. They were aging. They were doing things. They were herding cattle. Isaac was growing up, and he was learning, and Abraham was spending time with him. His one son through Sarah, the son of the promise, a son who he probably loved dearly. I could only imagine how dearly Abraham must have cherished and loved his son Isaac. And that's not to say he didn't love the others, because I think he loved them all. You look at how he petitions with YEUE that YEUE would accept Ishmael because Isaac hadn't been born yet. He said, well, would it be all right if Ishmael was the son you're talking about? And YEUE says, no, it's going to be through Sarah. I'm going to do good things with Ishmael. Don't worry about Ishmael. But he loved Ishmael. I think Abraham was a guy with a big heart. I think he loved his children. I think Sarah was a little bit of a bitch. I don't think that about every woman in the Bible. I don't. I really don't. But I think she might have been because of the way she acts. And I think she might have been a little spoiled. Kind of like Rachel. Kind of like Rebecca. Seems to be a pattern here. This isn't every woman in the Bible. Come on. But there's plenty of them. That's not to say that every guy I see in the Bible I think's a good guy. I think most of them are assholes. Let's get that straight. All right? I'm not saying these things because I have a specific male bias. If I see a woman, Ruth. There's a model woman. Her mother-in-law, Naomi. There's a model woman. Leah, Jacob's first wife, who Laban scammed to have him marry. Model woman. Jacob, who was so in love with her little sister, the princess Rachel. She died early, giving birth to her second son, Benjamin. She was buried in a place that they transliterate as Bethlehem Ephratah. It's a special place, because I think Bethlehem was a really big place, actually. But when Leah finally dies, because Leah outlives Rachel in spades, when she finally dies, this is how much appreciation that Jacob gained for Leah, the one he didn't love like Rachel. He requested from his sons that he be laid next to her in the family's ancestral cave tomb, whatever it was that Abraham had purchased in the first place, next to Leah. She was a model woman. So I don't think that about every woman. I know some people might get that idea because there are a lot of bitches in the Bible, but there's a lot of assholes. A lot of assholes, a lot of bitches. Which would explain why Israel's in the shape that they are today, and nobody, and I mean nobody, I don't think anybody has actually heard from or even been inspired by, in a real significant way, maybe a little here and there, just the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because we suck. That's the bottom line. The Bible is full of lousy people doing lousy things. You read the narrative, and you literally are asking yourself, are they serious right now? The sad thing is, yes. Now, with all of the problems I went over in this video that there is in the text, and there's a lot of problems in the text. The one thing that's interesting about all of these changes that have been made is, unless it's something really important, they want to change something geographically, they want to change our perceptions of a certain event, things like that. If it's really mundane things, like people talking to each other or whatever, those are the things that are actually not as touched because they seem mundane. So there's a lot of those things, the things that seem just not important. Not if you want to change people's perception of geography, culture, people, things like that. You don't really have to fool around much with personal interactions and mundane things. Those are oftentimes the passages where you can find some real nuggets. And even in the English translations, you can bet that those more mundane passages are probably translated a lot better than the others. But here is a passage, because there's so much riding on this passage in a lot of different ways. This is a passage that not only do I believe has been altered greatly for a number of reasons, but I see within the Hebrew big problems, and especially when you compare certain items to Greek. I'm going to try to tie this in at least two ways, maybe three, as far as how it's been changed for propagandistic purposes, and then bring up some interesting implications to it all. Genesis 22. Isaac is grown, at least to be a teenager, and I think Abraham just loved him, just absolutely adored Isaac. So in English, in the King James Version, it reads, "And it came to pass after these things," so all the stuff that he went through with the Philistines and Gerar and all that, okay, "that God did," and it says, "tempt Abraham, and said unto him," and I'm not going to go through every single individual word in here, okay? Just want to let you know there are words in here that are a bit dubious. "And he said, Behold, here I am." That's supposed to be Abraham. "And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son," in parentheses, "Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of." Now, I don't know how it is that any Christian or Bible believer is somehow in disbelief when the atheist comes along and says, "Nah, I really don't want to serve a sadistic God who tells the father of a nation that he needs to go and murder his son. Not only murder his son, but burn him. I don't really want to have anything to do with that God. Sounds pretty crazy and sick to me. No one should ever take offense when they say that, but we do. Why do we? Because our perceptions of Genesis 22 have been tainted by New Testament theology. In part, of course, by Paul's dissertation, whoever that person was that they call Paul's dissertation in Galatians, as well as all the theology there. Well, this is, of course, the whole picture is that God, they don't really, very few will even call him Yahweh, which is, again, not correct. That's Masoretic, Yahweh. If you want to call him Yahweh, you're still following Masoretic rules. Yahweh. And they'll say, well, it was a picture. It was a lesson. And he was showing Abraham, and I guess everybody who would look back on it, Isaac, because I'm sure Isaac would have looked back on that fondly, that horrible, traumatic experience. And I'm sure he'd gather the kids around and tell them the story about how his dad almost murdered him. And they say that, well, this is the picture you see because God tells Abraham to go sacrifice his son, his only son that he gave him, by the promise through Sarah. That's more accurate. His son through Sarah, he promised him, that you love. I want you to take him up to a mountain I'm going to show you and kill him. Huh? Did that really say what I think it said? It did. It did. In fact, literally, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I tell thee of. Well, what will the pagans think when they find out that I'm about to do some shit way worse than they've been up to? I don't know. But that's supposed to be our picture of grace. Well, God didn't make Abraham do it. God stopped Abraham from doing it. And don't you know, God loves us so much that he did some really heinously violent stuff to his own son, because that's somehow supposed to convince us that all of that violent, heinous shit that he did to his own son, who was supposed to be perfect, that somehow actually covers everybody else's sins. It doesn't cover all the consequences of everybody else's sins. It doesn't fix the fact that if you murdered somebody, they're still murdered. You took their life away from them. It doesn't fix the fact when you or I steal things and the person we stole them from doesn't get any kind of payback for it. Doesn't fix that. What does it do? It gives us a get-out-of-jail-free card. So I guess in order to pull all of this off a couple thousand years later, God told Abraham, go murder your son. And of course, the whole plan was he's going to stop him right before he murdered him. Well, it's weird. I'll tell you why it's weird. The first reason it's weird is because burnt offering is this word ole, which is actually a variation of just to go up. It's used all through the law on all kinds of passages where you think that what's being said is this animal and that animal and this and that and the other should be offered as a burnt offering. It's ole, it's going up. Well, yeah, going up, because when you burn something, it goes up. Right, right. Smoke, goes up and stuff. But there's words for those things. There's words for fire. There's words for smoke and all that. That's not what's being said here. It's actually just words. 3 times in just Genesis 22:2 is a variation of the word ole. Ole, used. I can put it on screen if you don't believe me. Fine. Let me put it on screen. I use the great big... look at this. This is the app that has the great big giant letters on it. Makes it easier for people to see. So the first time a variation of that word is used, we see it. It makes these verses really big too. We see it here. The ole. And that's what they translate as offering. And then we see it again, ole, for burnt offering. Ol, on. Hey, wait, ol, on. Want you to notice something. Ol is the root here of these words that we've just seen. Ol, on. You gotta keep saying that. Why? Because ol appears about 2,300 times. And is translated as like against, over, on, therefore, because, at. And it's used a ton in, for instance, like the in geography portions where a border will be described, whether we're talking about like in Numbers 34, or whether we're talking about in Joshua, or later in Numbers even, a little bit in Judges 2. Because when something ascends, goes from lowlands to highlands, if it ascends, it uses yerad, as in to go down, and when it descends. When it ascends or goes up, it uses ol, ole, olut, variations of ol. And they use it in the same verse. But twice when they use it, they want to make it burnt offering. And that's just dishonest. No. So I'd like to get that out of the way without doing this whole chapter, because there's far more dubious wording that happens in here concerning this whole idea of Abraham murdering his son. But here's a real interesting one. Here's why I ended up at Genesis 22 anyways. Because I told you, I'm working on an Exodus chapter for my book. I ended up at Genesis 22, verse 2, because when I was looking through all of the terms for the mountain which first Moses leads his flock to, and I'm not even going to bring up the burning bush because that's really shoddy stuff there, seeing a burning bush and all, okay? But he goes to this mountain. Now, in Exodus 3:1, the mountain's called the Er Elohim, the mountain of the God. It's also called HRB, Horeb, or Horeb. They usually translate it Horeb in Latin and English. But it's also referred to, besides the mountain of God, the Elohim, Horeb, or Horeb, Sinai, or, of course, Sinai. It's also called YEUE, the mountain of Yahweh. Same place. It's referred to as by 4 different titles, and it's a really important place. Now, I had to search through all of the Old Testament to try to find where I could come up with all of the references. Because if you're doing geography, you got to look at all these references to start figuring some stuff out. But what was very weird to me is that the earliest reference that I had was Genesis 22. Now, it wasn't actually verse 2. It was later on, after when Abraham was supposedly getting ready to go stabby time on his son, and the angel stopped him. He actually makes a statement later on in Genesis, and it says right here, I really want to actually read this to you because the whole point is he's saying something in here that can only be linked to this so-called Mount Sinai. And it's 22:14. Glad I referenced that. And in English, and Abraham called the name of that place, I love this one, Jehovah Jireh, as it is said, to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen, Yahweh. Check all the other occurrences of Yahweh, and you're going to find that it has to do with either specifically Mount Sinai, or you're going to find it up in the later prophets in a few passages that are very, again, weird. They're translated weirdly. And whenever you come across passages that are translated weirdly, that aren't sticking to the rules of grammar that have been established long before them, you got to start wondering, why is that? Well, why did they just out of the blue decide that this passage was going to say something completely different, even though it's using the same kind of grammar, structure, syntax, so on and so forth that I've seen hundreds of times before this? And it is. So I thought that was weird. That's super weird. Am I wrong? Super weird. That he called that mountain that he was told to go to this Yahweh. And furthermore, I would say that if that mountain turned out to be the same one that we might know as Horeb or Sinai or the Mountain of God, that would actually make all the sense in the world. All the sense in the world. Now, if you want to believe the New Testament, or you want to believe the writings by the so-called Apostle Paul, he says in Galatians that that mountain is in Arabia, which is total nonsense. I disprove this, that it couldn't possibly be in Arabia, in the book. And he's actually referring to this incident when he's making that argument in Galatians 3. But it would make all the sense in the world in the sphere of the context of the Old Testament. If this mountain he went to that he calls YEUE was indeed also the mountain where Yahweh first made himself known to Moses. But, wait a minute, can't be. It can't be. You know why it can't be? It can't be because the text tells us in verse 2 that he's going to Mount Moriah, or the land of Moriah. So it can't possibly be the same as Mount Sinai. In fact, it wouldn't have been a really good thing if Paul would have mentioned this Mount Moriah in Galatians, because he doesn't. He says 2 mountains, one Jerusalem and one Sinai. But wait a minute, if we go into the Middle East, we look at the map of the Middle East and we go like right into Jerusalem and we poke around Jerusalem, we'll see that one of these little hills, because they're not mountains, we'll see that one of these little hills here is actually called Moriah. Oh, okay. So that must have been where he took Isaac, right? To Mount Moriah. So it couldn't possibly be Mount Sinai. I mean, come on. Even if the Middle East model is wrong, it can't be the same thing. That's Mount Moriah, and the other is Mount Sinai. Even if it's called Horeb, the mountain of God, mountain of the Lord, whatever. That's Mount Moriah. And we know that because Moriah even appears in other places. We can see it in 2 Chronicles 3:1. Well, funny thing, you should notice that. First off, Mount Moriah, period, doesn't appear in the New Testament. It's nowhere to be found, and it would be a really good little detail to include in the New Testament, especially when we're supposed to be dealing with symbolism. In Genesis 22, Yahweh telling Abraham go murder his son, but then he doesn't have him do it, but then he murders his own son. It should be on the same mountain, right? Mount Moriah. But it's not. There's no Moriah. In the New Testament, all we get is Calvary in one version of the Gospels, and then we get Golgotha in others, place of the skull, outside the city, so on and so forth. We don't get any Mount Moriah. It's not there. That's an important detail. Well, I don't understand why that is. Certainly, though, the Greek versions of the Old Testament, because whenever the people who did the Septuagint and all, whenever they would come across what was supposed to be a proper name, they would always transliterate it. That's why I was able to do that first hour or so in bringing it all together, because that's what they do. So if we look at the Greek in Genesis 22:2, we find Isaac. You see there's Isaac right there? I know it's small, but you have an iota, then you got a sigma, you got 2 alphas, and you got a chi. Isaac. They've transliterated his name from Obri to what they call Greek. You have Abraham right up here, sticks out like a sore thumb. You go through the whole verse, no Moriah. No Moriah. You say, well, wait a minute. How could they forget Moriah? It's so important. Well, instead of a transliterated word that sounds at least a lot like Moriah, they put in a word that is basically upsilon psi, heta, lambda, omicron, sigma, and they say hoopsilos, and I would probably say upsilos, but they want you to have that aspirant at the front, Hupsalos. Well, how do they use hupsalos? Well, unfortunately, they're only going to show you New Testament uses, but it's used as high, higher, or highly. Wait a minute. So you're telling me if we look at this now, and we can get a good idea of what it would look like in English from Brenton. But Brenton says, and this is only what Brenton was supposed to have done his translation. Oh, not much more than a century ago, Brenton? And he said, take thy son, the beloved one, whom thou hast loved. I wonder if he loved him. Isaac. And go into the highland. And offer him there for a whole burnt offering. Yeah, okay. On one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. That's what Brenton got out of it. It's pretty similar in King James too. One of the mountains, I'm going to tell you. I'll point it out. I'll show you. Go to what? The highlands. He tells him, go to the highlands. And I thought, well, that's really something. Let me see what it says in the Vulgate. So I copied the Vulgate and I put it into Google Translate. And when it translates, because I didn't see, the Vulgate does the same thing, okay? The Latin is right here. You can see Isaac right there. It does the same thing. When it believes that it's looking at a proper name, it gives you a transliteration, a Latin transliteration of the proper name. But whoever did the Vulgate didn't think that there was any proper name there, Moriah, because it says, he said to him, take your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of the vision. The land of the vision. Interesting, and offer him there as a burnt offering. Here's my point. My point is, first off, the wording, especially in Genesis, is so untrustworthy. There's no reason to believe until we have very solid, concrete proof in the text. There is absolutely no reason to believe that what we're seeing here is this God, YEUE, telling Abraham to go kill his son. In fact, all I even see in this verse is him telling him to take his son Isaac and go up to the highlands, and he's going to show him a mountain to go to. The rest is a number of verses and full of a lot of dubious terms. But whether or not YEUE's telling him to murder his son is not, and the implications that it has with New Testament theology, those aren't the only interesting bits to this. I want to swing back around to YEUE, the mountain of the Lord. Could it possibly be the same mountain as what we know of as Sinai, Horeb, so on and so forth? My answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. It sure can, and as I said, if it were, it would make the events that we see in the Old Testament follow a logical course of thought, idea, concept. It would make it make sense. But they purposely made this Moriah, which actually varies, and it could be a number of different words, meaning a number of different things. They turn it into this Mount Moriah, and they name one of the hills Moriah, and I'm sure you're going to see things about Mount Moriah and Moriah in Josephus. I'll bet. I haven't checked. I'll bet you'll see things about Mount Moriah in very untrustworthy establishment history sources. I'll bet. Bet you could find it in Jerome. Bet you could find it in Eusebius. I'll bet. So they turn a word that we have no other way of knowing because there's no capitals or anything. There's no sign in here telling us that's a proper name, that's not a proper name. They turn a word that both the people who turned this into Greek and Latin thought was a common word, one meaning high, the other meaning vision. Now, I think I know why the Latin thought it was vision, because it's Moriah, which would be similar to some words that are translated as vision. I think that's the only reason why they said vision. However, very interesting that the Greek used a completely different word, this upsilos, and that it's used. Interestingly, in the New Testament, they have Jesus going where? To an upsilos. So you know they were certainly trying to follow a logical train of thought in the New Testament into this high place, high places. Now this isn't the word that would be used for Sinai, but it's high places. Why is it high place? Well, all mountains, you're getting into areas of mountains, mountain ranges, you're going into the highlands, the high places. That's what the land does. The land falls all the way to a great river basin, but it rises all the way to mountains. That's why we have the awesome hydrological cycle. So, could it for really real, be the same mountain? If air actually means mountain, that's the word that's used in Hebrew and translated just a bunch of times as mountain. In fact, it's H2022, and it's translated about 545 times as mountain. Do I know for a fact air is mountain? No, I don't. But it does appear a lot of times with other words that would seem to indicate going up. That's why I'm going with mountain for now, because it does seem to appear with a lot of other words in context which would seem to be going up, upwards, like we just saw with 3 of these olds. Could I be wrong about mountains going up? Sure I could. But we are talking about a location. Whether it was a mountain or a hole in the ground, we're talking about a location. So why is it that I actually believe that this location, which they've literally turned a common word into a proper noun to try to get us to believe that this is a mountain in Jerusalem. Why do I think that that's not a mountain in Jerusalem and that it's actually the same as Mount Sinai? Very possibly. Well, let me tell you. So here's precisely why that could have been Mount Sinai, not this mythical, made-up Mount Moriah. The first clue we find in Genesis 22:4. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. Well, that's interesting. That's really interesting. You know why it's interesting? Here's why. Because the approach, the whole terrain here in Palestine is very, very rough and rocky. Even in the modern age, when so much money and time and state-of-the-art, cutting-edge engineering from the West has been done to this land to make it seem like it's valuable to anyone other than the poor, meager, very few inhabitants, like Bedouins and some Arabs that lived there, before they went in and piped up giant water pipelines up to the place where they call Jerusalem and cut roads for you to get there, and those roads are still twisty, turny, windy roads. It's all very hilly, all rocks. There's not one mountain in this whole land. The only real mountain anywhere near here is way up north, and it's in, what, Syria? It's up here, Mount Hermon. That's the only actual mountain. That's not even that big, okay? But where Jerusalem is, it's nestled within all of these rocky hills. And Abraham would have had to have approached either from this rocky route, which he probably wouldn't, because let me here do this. I should have had these on. Put the roads on. There's a very small road that winds and winds its way through to Jerusalem. A couple of really tiny little roads trying to wind their way up these rocky hills over here to the west to Jerusalem. It's quite difficult to get there from the other direction. You might have to go up a ridge and follow your way in. If Abraham was actually going on a mule, like the translations tell us, he would have likely have had to have gone over to hell itself, yes, the Dead Sea Basin, and then made his way back up from the east. He would have never, ever seen what they call Mount Moriah until he was like on top of it. He wouldn't have saw it from a distance. There's no way he saw the hill they're trying to say is Mount Moriah or any other one from a distance. Not with all of this going on. Do you know the hills on either side of the place they say is Jerusalem and Palestine? Did you know the hills flanking it are higher than the hills in it, including what they say is Mount Moriah? He would have never saw that hill, for one thing. Why am I yelling so much? Because it pisses me off. All the money and the time. Can you imagine? Think about it. If people started going to visit this place around the time when Mark Twain did in the, he went in the very late 1800s, right? And there were very few pilgrims that would go there. They'd either save up a lot to go there, or they were like, sort of somebodies and could go there. Since then, and especially since they took over the place and named it Israel in 48 and forward, the amount of money that's been sunk in here just in tourism, off the charts, man, off the charts. Okay? So no, absolutely do not believe that he would be going from this location that they say is Beersheba here or any other and seeing this hill from a distance on the third day when he lifted up his eyes. No, I don't. Now, the internal reasons of the Bible, which is why I think that it probably is the same hill that we would know as Horeb or Sinai in the Bible. Not the one over in the Sinai Peninsula, but the one in the Bible. Few things. One thing is when YEUE appears to Moses in in Exodus chapter 3, 1, it's really 3 and 4, the first half of 4, 3 and 4. He tells him, and here's the plan, I don't want to read all the chapters, but he does tell him, you can check. He says, I'm going to deliver Israel. He gives him the whole plan, he lays it out. He said, you're going to know that I'm your prophet and I'm with you, that when I do deliver the people, you're going to come to this same mountain and worship me here. You're going to know that's going to happen. He tells him that's going to happen. So that he knew when it happened, yep, it happened. But he also tells him, he says, essentially, he's going to pick a fight with Pharaoh, Poroah, and he says, I'm going to harden his heart, and I'm going to basically make it to where he don't want to let you go. And he says, but here's what you're going to do. You're going to ask Pharaoh, Poroah, let YEUE, our God, the God, has said, let us go out a 3-day journey to worship. They use the word worship. I don't know exactly what it means exactly, okay? But they use a word. They translate worship. 3-day journey from where they are in Mitzrayim. All right. Why would they ask him to go out for a 3-day journey? What if he let him go? Where are they going? Well, the plan always was to go from Mitzrayim to Mount Horeb / Sinai / the mountain of God / the mountain of YEUE, and then to go to Canaan, because he was definitely going to give them that land. Why ask a 3-day journey? Because they could get there if they went by the way of the land of the Philistines, which we see in Exodus 13, that it was near, and it wasn't all of Israel. It was just the elders. It was a band of men, able-bodied grown men, who asked to go a 3-day journey to worship YEUE. Where would they go? The only place that they would go according to the plan. This Mount Horeb, Sinai, mountain of the Lord, mountain of God. That's where. You say, well, why did it take them a couple of months to get there in the Bible when we see in Exodus? We see in Exodus 19. They didn't get there till like the 3rd month after they left. That's true. But we know from Exodus 13 that first off, YEUE took them the long way. He took them the long way. Why? Because he was taking them around other people's borders, for one thing. He said, lest they go near the land of the Philistines, because it was close, and they see war, and they repent, and they want to go back to Mitzrayim. He said, I'm going to take them another way. And he took them the long route. He took them the long route. And not only did he take them the long route, which stretched out the time, there were incidents along the way, like, the parting of Yom Soup, or what they call the Dead Sea, or the Red Sea. And there were, the logistics of moving not only 3 million Israelites, but all their flocks and herds they took with them, all their possessions which they took with them, and even more possessions because the Mitzri gave them all kinds of stuff to get the F out of Mitzrayim, and a mixed multitude. So people not Israelites who decided they wanted to leave too. They went with them too. So you have a group of people who would cover a number of square miles just in their camp. Have you thought about how long it would take to move a group of people that big? The logistics of moving a group of people that big. That's one of the reasons it took them so long to get to places, besides things that happened. And they needed to stop, and they had babies, and they had children, and they had to let their cattle graze. Because if they moved their cattle too often over the course of a day, or too often over the course of time, their cattle would start getting underweight, and they had to care for them. There was things they had to do. It takes a long time to move millions of people. This Mount Sinai was not that far away. But you say, well, wait a second. Deuteronomy 1:2 says it's an 11-day journey from Mount Horeb to Kadesh. And we can look right on the map. Look at this. Right on the map. Here we got Kadesh right on the border, the modern day border between Israel and Sinai Peninsula. And we have Beersheba, 30, 40 miles northeast of here. And the Bible says it's an 11-day journey from Horeb, which they want to make either at the south in the midst of the mountainous maze of the Sinai Peninsula, or they want to make it they want to make it in Arabia, very close to the same latitude, right by Jebel el-Lawz. 11-day journey. Well, a couple things about that. First off, you're not going to move a people that size over that distance in 11 days. And obviously there were 20 stops in between their Mount Horeb and Kadesh. So obviously not 11 days as in the time it took them, because they weren't doing 2 stops a day. And the most important bit of information from that little verse, Deuteronomy 1:2. There are 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir unto Kadesh Barnea, or Kadesh Barno. It's the same place as Kadesh. By way of Seir. They had to stick to certain places, paths, and locations so that, for one thing, they wouldn't be infringing on people's land. It specifically told us that when they went a certain path, there were 11 days' journey. Now, I don't know exactly how they are gauging a day's journey, but I do know there's a good reason they stuck in by way of Seir or Shuir. Now, then there's also a passage from 1 Kings, which I'll address real quick, and then I'm just going to kind of wrap it up. This is Elijah, and I thought it was 18. I think it's 19 when he flees. And what he does is he flees from Jezebel and he runs down to Beersheba. And then it says he goes a day into the wilderness. Then an angel shows up with food and drink under a juniper tree. He eats, he drinks. And then it says he arose, did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb. That's a long journey, eh? Well, that's not what it says. It says he went for 40 days and 40 nights. Like he fasted, just like Moses did when he went to Sinai. It doesn't say it took him 40 days and 40 nights to get there. It just says he went there on the strength of the food and drink he was given by this malach, so-called angel. But it doesn't say it took him that long to get there. I hope this has been a good demonstration of how they can fool with our perceptions of what the Bible really is saying. They fool all the time with terminology. There's a difference between a derech, which would essentially be like a road or path somewhere, and elek or yilek or ulek, which actually means to walk, to actually do the process, the verb of walking. But they will translate them the same way. And that matters. 40 days of walking is not the same as saying it's a 40-day journey. Why? Because it depends on who's going and what standard of measurement they were using that they would call a day's journey. And I don't have a clue about that. I have not a clue. Unless there's words being used, and there are measurement words that appear in the Bible. So you would expect measurement words somewhere in here, telling us a certain length by distance or something, you know? Or even, you know, how like a theodolite works, where theodolite measures in these degrees, these very slight degrees, and then it goes to seconds, minutes, so on and so forth, for a 360 degree. Like if there was a point, for instance, if you used a theodolite and looked towards the horizon, and you went certain degrees based on how much a day would be, and you could calculate that to how far a distance it would be to the horizon based on how high you were when you took the measurement, then maybe you could decide that that much was a day's journey. But at this point in time, I don't know. However, I think this was a good illustration of a couple of things. First off, how hard they try to change the Old Testament in order to match New Testament theology. 1. Secondly, just how willing they are to change the words of the Bible to get us all screwed up in our heads and in time and space, 2. And 3, that our understanding of geography is absolutely wrong, especially if we're trying to force this into a Middle Eastern, the status quo model. So with that, like I said, I'm glad I could do another one this fast. And please, if you think these videos or any of my videos are important enough to listen to or to watch, they're important enough to share. Share them with people that you know. Share them on social media groups, any kind of social media group that you're part of, wherever. Share them. Please. Please like. Please comment. And before you know it, that monetization is coming off. I know everybody can't afford the YouTube $10 a month for the complete bullshit that they mostly give us. The fact that it's so hard to find things, like good things that actually exist on YouTube. There are still good channels. There are still good content creators on YouTube. They're still there. They still exist, but they make them like pulling teeth to try to find them. And I understand that. I'm sensitive to that. And I don't want to be in business with Google. So, hey guys, I'll be seeing you again soon. Watch for the t-shirts and other things. Developments are happening. I'll see you next time.